Thank you for this nice introduction. It's very nice to be here, and thank you for the invitation. It's actually a Saturday morning, as previous speaker said, so we'll keep it a little bit more friendly and warm. It's a small crowd, so it's. So I met some really interesting people this morning, so I'm really excited to be here and participate in this event.
You can do
We're good?
this.
Okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
So just to sort of summarize this introduction that was done earlier, my name is Harry, and I am I'm sort of working with different hats over the last few years. Initially, I was working, and I'm still collaborating with GRNet. So GRNet is basically the executive arm of the Hellenic Ministry of Digital Governance in Greece. So the ministry is basically putting forward the policies, and GRNet is one of those organizations that actually implements it. So it has implemented gov.gr, which is the equivalent of gov.uk with public services and so forth. And around 2022, I got sort of involved in a project about EHDS. And back then, EHDS was just a word for me. And only a handful of people basically started, working a little bit on this. And my first mission was to assess the utilization of the existing network, which was My Health at EU at the time, to feature or to foster the secondary use of health data. So, I mean, by show of hands, how many of you here are familiar with EHDS? I mean, you've seen the talk yesterday? Okay, so that actually messes up a big chunk of my presentation, but that's okay. I'll handle. I'll try to accommodate as we go along. So back then, we started working on this assessment, try to see if the existing network of My Health at EU, which you probably know as well, which is the primary use of health data. It's an existing network that facilitates already countries involved in the exchange of information about patients, about prescriptions, etc. It's also evolving as well. And we came up to the conclusion that we needed a new infrastructure, a new peer-to-peer federated network for the secondary use of health data in EHDS. And then I got more involved into the specifications of this infrastructure, and I collaborated with the Hellenic Ministry of Health in Greece to actually start building the first health data access body in Greece, and the very first infrastructure actually for that. So that's my secondary role, let's say, and in this work group. And quite recently, I moved to Brussels like a month ago, and I'm now working as a consultant for DigiSante as well. So I'm working on the modernization of existing health systems and partially on EHDS. So you know most of this stuff already. The idea behind EHDS, it's the same as well with all of these data spaces that the Commission put forward a few years back. It's part of the whole strategy, as you know. So the health part was the initial data space because we saw COVID and we saw the impact that COVID had, and this was an urgent need, let's say, to put forward such a data space. And also health and health data is quite an important aspect in terms of security issues and regarding all those very delicate aspects in terms of the type of data that we exchange. And therefore, this was one of the first data spaces that needed to put forward. Obviously, there are others that are coming along, like about culture, about education, about finance, and so forth. But HDS, the health data space, was one of the first ones to facilitate the different issues that basically existed. So, I mean, data was not enough. There was not the availability of a central kind of infrastructure to facilitate that, to assist this exchange of this information. And we we wanted to start looking at a very more, let's say, centralized solution for this part. So, I mean, one of the disclaimers I should probably do is the fact that my presentation and what I'm saying here is not obviously, let's say, are the expressions of the Commission, just in case. These are just my understanding and my expertise on the matter. So we have different actors which are really important. We have basically the patients that they didn't have full control over the data, who to share the data with, and why are these data shared, and for what reason, and so forth. So we didn't have this type of mechanisms, and I'm looking also on the aspect of Greece as well, because we didn't have. I'm accepting people as I go along. It's okay. And we have also the professionals that didn't have a lot of access to this data as well. So one of the first things that we started doing in Greece is basically created an application and an infrastructure for keeping a very initial record, for a health record for patients. And then we did the paperless provision of medication. This was very popular during COVID days because it eliminated obviously going to your PG and to your getting all this information in and so forth. And that was the baseline for connecting to My Health at EU, which is actually right now the optional network if you want to be connected and go to another country and share your data with your doctor in a foreign country, for instance, to see your medical record and get the medicine and so forth. So, but this was not actually facilitated on a permanent basis for all member states in the EU. So we have the primary and the secondary. I was mostly involved in the primary care, because now, for instance, in Greece, there's a series of projects that go on about improving the format of the health record, of the digital health record for patients, basically based on the new standards from the Commission. There are projects going on to expand the existing services of My Health at EU, based on what EHDS is requesting for primary care. So you have reports from hospitals, you have results from the potential exams that you do, and so forth. And then there's the secondary part, which is something that at least in Greece, we are in the very, very early stages. We've seen other countries which are very mature in this, like Finland, the FinData structure. We've seen in France, we have the hub in France, which is also quite advanced. And certain countries from the different member states are trying to get up to that same level of maturity. And we have different variations on that. And that's also a very critical part that we're trying to get people sort of aligned on that maturity level. So we have the primary care, which is My Health at EU, that's going very strong, and the secondary part. So I was mostly involved, and I'm still mostly involved in the secondary part, the health data at EU, which is coming along. And this is quite an important network because we have a huge element of rare diseases, and as well as orphan drugs, and the fact that we were not able to share this information in a structured, secure, and standardized way. And especially for rare diseases, like I think this scenario that we discussed with many people, you could have, for instance, Finland and some research organization in Finland that has really super cool AI algorithms and runs really nice AI models. But for instance, they don't have enough data on specific rare diseases that are mostly, well, I mean, you could see more data appearing on patients in the Mediterranean, for instance. So you have what recent research has shown that you have around 6,000 different rare diseases, and only 6% out of that is it has a specific cure, for instance. And people that have this type of rare diseases, actually a very huge percentage of those people really want their data to be shared just to find a cure, or maybe their data shared in order to have cures for other diseases, and to have a new healthcare sort of plan sort of decided and so forth. So this is a huge demand. And the secondary part is basically focusing on this specific aspect. So you have the first part, which is using this data for research. So you have specific usage, specific purposes, specific data that you want to sort of get your hands on. And this has to be done in a secure environment, analyzed in a secure way. Obviously, data needs to be anonymized or pseudonymized and so forth. On the other aspect, you have the member states that you need to define at least one health data access body or more than that. And the new sort of architecture emphasizes on the fact that you have different HDAPs, but you can have a single HDAP coordinator in the member state. So you have different health data access bodies in any country, having different types of data. So, for instance, in Greece, we have organizations that are involved only for sort of collecting information about medicine, collecting information about prescriptions. Other bodies are involved with collecting information about insurance policies and so forth, etc. So you have different aspects or different organizations that could be potentially HDAPs. But you have one coordinator, and that could be also, for instance, the ministry of the country or a new organization that is defined. That's a bit general at the moment. And then you have the process, which is the most important part, about applying for a permit or applying for a data access on that. And then there's a whole process about accepting this or rejecting it, and also you're able to sort of object a little bit on that. And then once you get the permit, you have it for a specific period of time, you are able to start analyzing it and so forth. So this is the journey, more or less. So you have a researcher that he or she wants to get access to some data, and he needs to apply for a permit. And there is a sort of a data preparation. That permit could be on a single data set or an aggregated data set, with specific quality labels and so forth. And these, once created, it is located, it is placed on a secure processing environment for that research to access to it and analyze it for a specific period of time. And obviously, then you have the results that are coming out of this analysis, which by law, by the new legislation, have to be publicly available as well. And then obviously you get a series of fees that you need to pay for using this data, and penalties, for instance, if you haven't used the data according to your original request. So there is auditing going on as well about whether this data has been used appropriately, etc. So the Commission has put forward a series of initiatives to help accelerate this difference in maturity in the different member states. So one of the series of projects they put together was a specific grant, a direct grant for all member states to be funded to actually create this infrastructure that would connect with the central infrastructure that the Commission is actually creating as well. So there is a central part created by the Commission, and all the member states need to connect to this infrastructure, as well as providing the services nationally. So this had different pillars. These direct grants have different pillars. I'm going to show you a little bit later on what I mean. So countries which are really mature, they could focus more on improving their quality of the data and how to improve the quality of the data stored and these type of activities. Other countries like Greece, they use this grant to build the whole infrastructure which is not in place. So this project in Greece has been obviously led by the Hellenic Ministry of Health, And it's also supported by GRNet and EHA, which are two organizations belonging to the same Ministry of Digital Governance. EHA is mostly focusing on the health applications. So by law, it has the authority to develop health-related applications in Greece. And GRNet is facilitating the whole policy, as I mentioned before. So we're doing a lot of development in cross-ministry, in cross-ministries in Greece. So this is the first part, the national level. This is what this grant is doing. It's basically trying to establish the first health data access body. You have different data holders that provide this data. I mentioned before, different organizations that provide this data. And you have different data users internally in Greece that want to do this. So the first objective of the project is to establish this infrastructure. And the second objective is to basically interconnect this infrastructure with what's happening on the European Commission. So as you probably are aware, the Commission is also doing a lot on developing their own central infrastructure. They are already in release 2 of the functionality that it provides. So soon enough, countries would be able, through the one specific part of the infrastructure, to connect with this central part. So this is more or less the journey that I explained before. So you have a metadata catalog for each country that shows you the availability of the data, and then you have an application management system that you can apply for this data or aggregate the data. Once you get this agreement, this authorization, you get to put this data on a secure processing environment. I mean, not you, the ASAP or the data holder that has the data actually. And then you are able to analyze it and come up to conclusions and publicly report that. So this is more or less the idea. Now, where do we stand and what data do we have? So the first big pile of data that we have, and then the requirements, let's say, for building this, is obviously the legislation. There is one document that has been agreed before summer, and now member states are discussing the finalization of the commonly agreed text. So I think last week they were discussing the linguistics of the legislation. So it's going to take a little bit longer to be finalized, but there is also an initial version which member states can use as to what would be the final, let's say, the final outcome. The other set of information is TEDAS 1 and now recently TEDAS 2. TEDAS 1 is the project that was the pre-project, let's say, the preliminary project, the preparation project for EHDS. And now they have a new version, which is TEDAS 2, coming up to help with the specifications, to help with the onboarding of the different countries and so forth. So it sort of runs a little bit in parallel with the direct grant that I mentioned before. Another important project that's already also ongoing is the Health Data EU pilot for secondary use. So there, what has started to be achieved is to start discussing a few things. For instance, for the metadata catalog, like what is the specifications? So it could be a discussion focusing on DCAT-AP, as you probably heard, it's a standard for having the metadata, and they're creating the health DCAT-AP, which is the application profile, the standard that will be used for describing health data sets, metadata for the secondary use. So apart from that, there's a series of projects going on there as well, which is also important. One final important initiative, it's the EHDS community of practice. So the Commission has been put forward a community of practice for all member states, where you discuss, you exchange information, you exchange best practices. More mature countries try to bring less mature countries up to speed and help them out with their own infrastructure. So you have the grant on one hand, and then you have the community of practice on the other hand. So these are very good tools that help you grow a little bit more on terms of your understanding. And of course, as I mentioned before, Health Data at EU pilot is not just putting forward some specifications like Health DCAT-AP, it's also building a preliminary version of this solution, of this architecture, and puts forward a few important use cases of how this should be or could be used. So you can see 5 different pilots led by different organizations. So you have ECDC, EMA, the Health Data Hub in France, and so forth, putting some cases in front with different countries. So they show how this data can be exchanged, how they can be analyzed, what results you can come out of it, and so forth. And these are the 4 business capabilities that these grants put forward. So the first one is for each nation to build their own national dataset catalog. Then you have the infrastructure or the system associated with data access and application management, how different people can access this metadata, they can view it, and they can apply for this metadata. Then you have the secure processing environment where these data are uploaded and then you can analyze them for a specific period of time. And finally is the cross-border gateway, which is the interconnection between your national infrastructure with the central infrastructure that the European Commission provides. So this idea, this journey is not only done internally for each member state, but can also be done by other member states, by other researchers in other countries that want to ask data from your country. So this is done through a centralized metadata catalog that will be available at the Commission level. Then where we are now in Greece is we are trying to finalize the analysis and design of these systems that I showed you before. And then from February onwards, we start building the solutions. So we have the data access management system. We are trying to focus mostly on open source solutions in order to build these tools. And we have really good examples from the community of practice, from our colleagues, for instance, in Finland, as I mentioned before. So we have really good solutions for the data access management. The National Dataset Catalog, we have examples coming from europa.data.eu. They have an open source structure for this type of metadata catalogs. But we also now have the Health Data CAT-EU, the Health DCAT AP model that can be used for describing this metadata. And then finally, the secure processing environment, which it's the one which is a little bit more challenging as an infrastructure. In Greece, we have a few high-performance computing infrastructures and data centers, one also coming up. And this will definitely be utilized for these purposes as well. And finally, as I mentioned before, the cross-border gateway part, which to a certain extent, it's more or less defined by tools that the Commission provides. So this is more like the APIs that you will be using, the e-delivery infrastructure for connecting and exchanging messages and communication with the central infrastructure. So more or less, it's like you can do whatever you want in your country. This is, let's say, a sort of black box to me for the 3 basic systems, that's the catalog, the secure processing environment, and the data application. But for the cross-border part, this is like what we can use for all countries to be interconnected. So there is a set of solutions there which will be available. Of course, finally, I think the most important thing is what each country should do. And this is what we are trying to do in Greece. Because as I mentioned before, we are a bit behind in these aspects, and some other countries are following more or less the same steps, or some other countries are a bit in the middle, and so forth. So the very first thing that we are doing is basically assessing the financial needs, the operational needs, and the legislative impact of this legislation in Greece. And specifically, the legislative part is quite a challenging one. Another big task that we're involved in is trying to map these data sources that we have from different organizations to see what type of national dataset catalog we're going to end up with, and see the quality that exists, because the quality is also quite an important aspect. I went like a few months ago to a hospital in Greece to check something, because I felt a bit dizzy while landing in Athens airport. I felt a huge pain in my head, and I had to go to the hospital to just check it. I thought I was having a stroke, actually, which was not the case. Thank God. And I went to the hospital, they did some exams, whatever. I went out, and I saw in my mobile app, the health hub that we have, that I was registered in a hospital for a completely different reason that I entered. So the secretary there, it was like 12 o'clock in the morning. She was obviously maybe very tired. So I said, I have a headache, this and that, whatever. And then she put something in just to enter me in the hospital. And then I left, and that was not updated by the GP that showed me and, made it more specific as I went along. So this is a very bad quality of data that exists because you have, let's say, a list of patients which visit the hospital for a completely different reason that they did. And this kind of culture does not exist definitely in Greece. We need to improve that in order to improve the quality of the data. So, for instance, for that, we need also to have capacity building, to help people understand the quality, the need for quality, understand what we are doing this, etc. So the legislation is also another big part. So we have to see what are the gaps in existing legislation and what new legislation we need to introduce. The establishment of the HTAPs, for instance, is quite a huge deal. We need to interconnect a bit with the stakeholders that can provide this information as well. We need to create a sustainable operational network of stakeholders and a community in Greece, an equivalent community of practice that the Commission is putting forward, but nationwide. And I think this is useful for most of the countries to bring people together that actually provide this, like patient organizations that provide specific needs, for instance, or that they would like specific data to put forward, etc. The interoperability aspect is also quite an important one, the national interoperability aspect. In Greece, we have a centralized government structure, but in other countries like Spain, for instance, you have different governmental structures in different regions of the country. So you get different needs there as well. And obviously, one of the huge deals about the rights of the patients, the opt-in issue that has been the very long discussion in the legislation, how patients can opt in and opt out from this mechanism. This has been quite a huge deal when it was discussing in the triage in the Commission. So this is also another important aspect that we need to safeguard. This was the end of my presentation. I tried to give you a brief overview of what's happening, what are the recent developments, and a bit of what's going on in Greece, and show you problems and issues that probably are faced in other countries as well. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Okay. I'm on first, but
Wow.
My actually interest is how your Greek implementation would handle a very typical use case when actually people want to publicly share their health data without restrictions on who will upload. For example, in my case, I open sourced my genome, and there are many people who did like this. And there are also communities like, for example, biohacking communities that have a leaderboard of their health biomarkers, and they actually strive to make it public without any ways to apply for health access, was just to let everybody download it. And will those initiatives be punished by new implementations or not?
That's a good question. Thank you very much. Well, I mean, I cannot really speak on behalf of the ministry, but I can tell you what are the problems with that, let's say. So the problems that we are facing is the fact that we don't currently have a very clear open source strategy in Greece, like not a very, let's say, commonly agreed or, so there's an initial issue there because we have an organization in Greece called GFOS, which is actually trying to implement open source strategies at policy level in terms of data infrastructure, etc. But certain aspects need to be adopted by the government, which is currently not the case. The second is the fact that I think we are a bit lacking behind on how to sort of create this infrastructure and deciding on these legislative issues that you mentioned. So these decisions have not been tackled yet. I think we need to finish with the mapping and see what type of data that we have. And then I guess the very first legislation aspects are going to be answering to what EHDS wants and also to this type of issues that you're mentioning. So, I mean, we're in a bit of a preliminary area for that answer, to be honest with you. But I think if that makes you feel better, that I think it should be freely available for people that have opted in. It should not be punishable. I think it should be freely available for, at least this is my hope. Well, see. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Next question. So I found your example with your hospital and your unfortunate medical occasion very relevant, because indeed at the Institute, we are always working with healthcare data quality, health data policy, sorry. And one of the issues is very much that healthcare professional have a different optic when inputting data than researcher, for example. So then the data they process are not relevant for with research anymore. They don't have a sufficient data quality. So I was wondering, is it for you, like you spoke about awareness, right? To bring awareness to health professionals. So I spoke about competencies. Is it sufficient? Is it enough? Like, what else can we do to make sure that healthcare professional, as like in a very broad way intended, help us out to have sufficient data quality?
That's a good, yeah, that's a very good question. Well, I think, I mean, you cannot really improve that unless you make people aware of why it is so important and try to push them to get more better awareness and as I mentioned before, do this capacity building on understanding the use behind this. So the first thing I think it would be to make a clear strategy and policy behind this educational program. So what we discussed with the ministry is the fact that, okay, we're trying to put this infrastructure in place. Technically, it should be fine, but you need to also make the people aware and train them at different levels on why they should be more careful about the type of data they enter and why this is so critical. And then we can try to put some, let's say, auditing mechanisms in certain points to try to minimize the error or the errors that exist. And then if you want to take it one step further and be a little bit more extreme, I think we can also have some kind of assessment of the personnel, of the people that are, you know, aware, that are, they understand, they are compliant, let's say, with these policies about quality of data. And they can be sort of kind of rewarding mechanisms for getting such a thing. I mean, I don't really see any other way of trying to establish something like this. Yeah, but it's a problem for sure.
Can you put the question?
Okay, so what steps can be taken to ensure that all European countries achieve a similar level of advancement in health data management, enabling more seamless and homogeneous? Yes, this is a great question. This is exactly what the COP is doing. I think, at least from the Commission side, they have been doing a tremendous work to try to get all these countries aligned. So we did the assessment. In the assessment I mentioned before in 2022, for instance, we saw that there is a different maturity level. We saw some existing attempts that were made for having sort of European-wide domain for these data sets that we have Darwin, for instance, and Data Europa EU. It has a health data set as well. But the COP and the grants are doing exactly this work, I think. And for instance, in Greece, that the direct grant was for all member states. All member states, I think, got this grant for different reasons. And now they're working on the COP, and there are a lot of countries also participating in TINDAS too. So there is a definitely alignment there. Now, the critical, I think, for me, the challenge for me, I think, is for these countries to take advantage of these tools, because I see certain cases that the tools are there, but there's not a full, let's say, they don't fully take advantage of this thing. And we might be missing on this opportunity. And I think there should be more awareness of what this information is and how they can help you to speed up this process. So I think this is the challenge behind this.
Thank you. We have one last question from Didier.
Yes.
Actually, to be honest, a few last questions.
A few. Wow.
But they are relatively short. The first one is why is there the possibility to have more than one central organ in each country? I suppose it is because of the federal system, but honestly, I think it's really bad. You know, it's already complicated enough, and I know it's quite strange that for Belgium we still don't know. Each time they explain, oh yes, but we don't know if there will be one central body, or you know, like in Belgium, we can have one in Brussels, one in Flanders, one in the German place, Germany place, Wallonia, and so on and so on. So we can do crazy, and maybe one federal to complexify everything. Okay, but so is there another reason, or it's only this? Because also we can imagine, or one for Christians, one for socialists. And so. Okay, and then the second question.
That question first.
Well,
No.
okay, it's okay. I think I'm okay. I remember.
Yeah. The second question is about
Thanks.
so the EHDS. Is it possible in to have, for let's say in Greece, for example, to have this right to electronic access? That's for me very important, and that's in the EHDS, to have it already working before the EHDS is really let's say practically there. To make what Anton is saying, for example, possible. So for people who want to share, and I speak here about data from your medical doctor, data from your clinicians and so on, but also data from your iPhone and so on. Okay, and the last question, I vaguely remember, and I hope I'm wrong, but probably I'm right, but probably I'm wrong. But I vaguely remember that there were that in one meeting, people were speaking of one form for scientists to ask access to health data. Did I dream? Yeah.
There was, okay, thanks. So, okay, going back to the first question, I think the reason behind it is more or less something related to the sort of the governance of its country. So basically, as you said, Spain, for instance, has 17 different sort of regions, and each one has its own, let's say, governmental structure. Obviously, they fall under the same umbrella of Spain, but they have certain cases which legislation is very regional. So you have one aspect which is related to that. One other aspect is related to the different domains, probably, that they have different types of data. So in Greece, maybe the scenario would be easier, so we could have one HDAP, but in other countries, I think, like you said, like Flanders and Brussels, etc., or Spain, for instance, it could be a different story. So I think the legislation accommodates for that. Now, the second question was, maybe not very good. So
about electronic access to health data.
Yes, so
is it possible to do it before?
For Greece, at least, there is already a deployment for My Health at the EU, as I mentioned before. Maybe I didn't make it very clear. So My Health at the EU has already an infrastructure which is optional, as you know. It's not something obligatory as EHDS is going to be. So now they have developed an infrastructure, and they are able to share the patient summary and the paperless prescription with other countries. So they've done already some tests, they passed the audit, and you can go to another country, and the prescription that you had in Greece, you can actually have it in another country, as if you were actually going into your local pharmacy and executing that prescription. So the steps are there. But the rest of the work needs to come by now with this project that we are doing. And regarding the third question associated with the application forms, the Commission is doing these different developments of different releases of the central platform, which includes forms associated with applications, with the information about the data sets and so forth. But this is at the central level. Obviously, this is a very good start for countries to use the same sort of structure for the forms. but each country might have different needs and different reasons, and that's associated with their legislation as well. So depending on the local legislation, these forms should be adopted, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a good beginning, but each country should follow their own legislation because restrictions do apply, et cetera. So I think this maybe covers all three questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now we have a general question answer round before lunch. So it's open to everyone. If you have questions or anyone else, please feel free.
More questions?
It's a very enthusiastic group. There's never lack of.
Actually, indeed, I was impressed.
Yes. And if you want, you can come straight.
David is, oh,
You can,
Thanks.
Yeah.
So my question is initially for Sophia, but maybe others may want to get involved too. Because you seem quite enthusiastic about the EU AI Act. You said, well, it's quite a good system, but which parts would you change if you really could get involved and do that? Or is it more important that instead of trying to wrestle the regulation, which is really hard, maybe we should be focusing on education, 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 because you also pointed out that people don't really understand what's going on. And then healthcare professionals have a limited understanding of AI, and the general public has a limited understanding. So is that maybe where we should put our effort? Because changing regulations is very hard, takes a long time. Or maybe the most important initiative is a third, which is to make AI more understandable generally. Because even though you try and educate people about AI, it's still a very much of a black box thing. So perhaps the most important thing is to ensure that AI itself is able to explain accurately what its decisions are about.
Thank you very much for the question. So first of all, I will start from the bottom and then I will climb back up because I have a fresher memory of your last point. So this was very much something that I reflected upon during my PhD, basically whether we should prioritize explainability over the benefit that AI can actually bring. And that's a bit of the problem, right? So you either decide that the main value to be protected is understandability and explainability. And then what happens then is the fact that you exclude a certain AI system that simply at the stage of the technique today cannot be explained. So I think it's a matter of value prioritization. So either you go for explainability, either you go to maximize benefit. And personally, but this is very personally, I've rather prioritize benefit. Why? Because explainability is not a value in healthcare nowadays, because we don't explain all the time everything to the patient. Point one. Point two, literacy. So I was reflecting about this yesterday because I have the lack and the peril of coming from a very remote rural area of Italy, right? So if I go back home, nobody knows what I'm talking about, you know, like, and they don't care that much because it's very much far away from their daily reality. So when I talk about AI literacy, I'm always thinking, what's the additional value from Tony, let's say, that is an average white male from my village? What is the added value for him when he goes to the doctor to know whether he's using an AI system? I don't think there is a value in that moment, but I think there is a value for Tony to know that artificial intelligence is a thing that is in our society in general, is not specifically for healthcare. And that's very much a point. So I would invest, if I was a legislator, if I was a policymaker, in literacy, digital literacy in general. And healthcare digital literacy is something that comes right afterwards. Medical competencies. I do have the luck to work with a lot of healthcare professionals, and they're not very enthusiastic about the idea of having more competencies to engage with, because their curriculum is quite heavy already. So they don't really want to do anything else. At the same time, they have a very different vision than us. And most of the time, they just think artificial intelligence-based medical devices are just medical devices for me. So they do not need anything else. So whenever they engage in some competencies framework, AI-related literacy thing, they do it out of personal interest, not really because they feel that it's going to improve their delivery of care as healthcare professional. I do believe that is a point, though, to again bring them aware, and perhaps it will pass through the fact that they are digital literate as citizens and not as healthcare professionals. So this brings back to the whole policy thing. About the AI Act, am I enthusiastic? I don't know. Like I'm very cautious about being enthusiastic or not. I find it very fascinating from a social point of view, because the AI Act came in a moment in which AI use was not yet that epidemic issue that we are discussing every day. So for me, it's more a societal response to a fear than an actual legislation that was needed, like compared to, for example, the medical device regulation that we really had to have, right? And to update when it was updated. So I would work a bit on the facility of applying the AI Act together with other regulations, because I don't think that it's a problem that we have only in healthcare. But perhaps in healthcare, you have the urge of applying it faster than in other, for example, like domains. I would say that. Does anybody want to jump in? So it's not a dual conversation, but
Always there, yes.
Yeah, it's,
Didier.
yeah.
But
Maybe,
yeah.
maybe after.
No, it's not the same. Yeah, I mean, I had similar questions about AI Act. So one that goes back to what you said, I think there is perhaps a need in the AI Act to have to take some kind of addendum per domain. You know, it's like maybe there is a need
What is gonna happen?
for exactly. So that's one issue, and the other one is it's one of those legislation I think which are very, very, let's say, sensitive to change. Because if you remember, they were really closing up the legislation or really closing to an end, and then ChatGPT came up and they delayed the whole process. So AI and innovations in AI, I was discussing that with David during the break, are quite much in the beginning, let's say. I mean, they're quite evolving. So is it a legislation which is quite strong in terms of adaptability? Or sustainability, depends on how you call it, like how much. Yeah. I think, I mean, this is the basic challenge, I think, for me, like the domains and the subject to change, the flexibility to change.
Okay, thank you.
Should I stand or?
No.
Okay.
Alexander, okay.
Hey, I forgot what I wanted to say. So what do you want to say? Oh, so first, thank you. So one small aspect, maybe I think to when it comes to the quality of data, I think actually yesterday was quite a really good talk on how this is going to be tackled. I was really happy to see in your slides the mentioning of the health union again, because this has been something I have been looking forward to for a long time, and then COVID happened, and the European Union finally kind of also saw this urgency. But now, actually, I don't see it happening. So I see there's less pressure now because people kind of forget that there was a pandemic. There was. So I would like to maybe hear your thoughts about, is there a system in place or on really checking on the member states, because we have all these nice plans now, like about closing having health data space, but I'm not so sure if it's so. What if if there's already procedure of checking that it will really happen in the member states, and one maybe a remark to the AI Act. I mean, I find it interesting that I have a lot of techno-progressive friends, which were always against regulation. And when generative AI happened, they came across people saying, "Oh, we need to regulate this." And I found it very interesting that the people who were normally, or in my sphere, were always against regulation, they were very in favor of regulation. And so I think it's from a political point of view, it's actually a good thing that the European Union, I think the first actor in the world actually addressed it, at least. So I'm pretty sure we can do things better in the AI, but I think it's good that it started. Yeah.
Yeah, good question. So for the I mean just for the first part, the direct grants that I mentioned before for both the primary health and secondary health are following very closely the overall plan that there is for the deployment of EHDS, from legislation up to the actual finalization of the central platform and the different member states and so on. So the best auditing that's happening now is the checking of the milestones and the deliverables that each member state has said that they're going to deliver in the terms of the systems and the connection and so forth. So this should be and is aligned with the overall plan. So that's the only method of let's say, checking and sort of pushing a bit forward on this being implemented in a, because imagine this is a timeline that involves all member states, and it's quite a huge task on its own. I mean, to try to align all of them together. And this is a quite good instrument, because the time plan is sort of structured in a way that all member states are aligned towards this goal, which is a good thing.
Just
in the AI part,
yeah.
maybe.
No, go.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. Perhaps them.
Just many interesting discussions. I want to say first that I totally agree with what you said, Sophia, about for me it's kind of I would say that even in a more brutal way. In most cases, when people have the choice between to be safe and to give their informed consent, they will choose to be, it is crazy. And I think it's only important to let people decide. It's when there is a choice, but in most cases, there is a good solution that's consensus. And then, okay, now, in the program, you saw maybe that there was this general discussion with the speakers, and also about the discussion about anonymization and pseudonymization. I want to say a few words about this, because we didn't. To be honest, I tried to have one speaker to speak about this specifically, and I couldn't find. So I will say a very short summary of the situation as I understand, and maybe Aris or Sophia, you will correct me. And then ask a few questions, and this is for everybody to intervene also. So the very short summary of the situation is concerning the capacity, concerning the, let's begin with the opt-out system for secondary data. There were many discussions, and at the end, they decided that countries, if they want, they can organize a system of opt-out. Then in the countries where the system of opt-out is organized, people can opt-out. Sorry, I suppose opt-out is clear for everybody, yeah? But the opt-out is let's say for the recording. So opt-in is you have to say, I want to share my data. Opt-out is you have to say, I don't want to share my data. But concerning, the opt-out is, you don't want. But even if you don't want, and that's kind of funny, in some cases that are very urgent, very important, the states can still decide to use your health data. So this is, okay, now coming to anonymization and pseudonymization. As far as I understand, but that's also a question for you, Jan, anonymization is the data is anonymized, and after that you cannot find it again. So pseudonymization is ARIS is not ARIS, is number 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and there you can find back the information. So some people told me that that anonymization, after that you cannot make signs, because you cannot make crossing of data, because there are 60%, I don't know, 20% of people who smoke and 10% of the people who have lung cancer, but since it was anonymized, you don't know if they are the same. I want to have some comments on this and maybe just a second. And maybe if my summary was not correct for some aspect, please correct me. Yeah, and Anton, please in this domain.
Yeah, so regarding the comment, it's partially right, partially wrong in a way that it depends like what you have in a data set. Maybe you have enough variables to train in a data set. The problem is more actually relevant for aging because some politely saying not very smart individual considers that age should be rounded, for example, to like decades because age is something that can de-anonymize a person. And it totally messes up analysis. There are so many wonderful data sets where they rounded the age and you cannot do any aging research because you don't have real age. You have like accuracy of like 5 years and it's totally useless. And I believe we have to fight to consider for actually not rounding age. I don't know how it's implemented in Greece.
I'm not involved in this area, so I wouldn't be able to tell you.
And another thing actually I wanted to ask, because the thing is that regulators are lagging behind technologies in most of the cases, but for example, in the field of privacy preserving machine learning, there are ways to actually run machine learning on data without actually knowing the data. So one is homomorphic encryption. Second one is, well, there are also ways like federated learning when you send the model to the hospital. And there are also ZK, zero knowledge proofs machine learning. And in such cases, I think the major burden is that you have to apply for access. That's something that kills many research initiatives because the typical way how researchers work, I mean, if you don't have like some crazy applications, is that you found a data set somewhere, say on Hugging Face, you play with it in an exploratory way, you see that your models has like some potential in it, and then you push forward analyzing it. If for exploratory needs, you have to write an application and pay a fee in a centralized system, it diminishes research, especially research by small research groups. And the thing is that in case of, for example, technologies like federated learning and so on, actually there are ways to make it, I don't know, do you actually, in your implementation, do you actually discuss privacy preserving machine learning to actually allow people to do privacy preserving machine learning without going through this forms filling process?
Well, I mean, currently we're designing, currently we're designing, so the process is not finished with the specifications, but the idea is that we want to follow basically what the legislation is saying. So whatever is outside of the legislation is not part of this. So it has to be, let's say, perhaps done on a national level that does not conflict what the legislation is doing. And there is the part that we want to try and allow people to sort of try and understand whether this data set is suitable for their research before actually going into the secure processing environment, because everything has to be done through there. So in any case, the set or an aggregated set needs to be delivered in the SPE in order to be analyzed.
And secure processing environment, how in Greece it will be what? Something that certifies the requirements, or you want to have it centralized?
No, I mean, that provides their own SPE according to the legislation. So this is something which we're trying, as I mentioned before, to be open source. It's going to be cloud-based, and it's going to be a security environment that provides some analytical tools as well. And the data cannot be, for instance, downloaded, they cannot be tempered, they cannot be... So, I mean, this is more or less what the general legislation is saying. But as I mentioned before, we are actually now designing it. So I'm going to be able to provide more information as we go along. I mean, it's a 4-year project, so we are at the beginning now. So we have time in front of us.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can just confirm that what Anton was saying. It's right. So essentially, when we're talking about data, we're talking about rows and columns, and we're talking about sort of some values which are assigned. So for the purpose of what we are doing, it actually for us it's fully anonymized data. So for example, for general drug discovery projects. I actually have a question for Alex, because I do consider myself a tech proggy, if you like, so progressive technologist. I'm surrounded by people who are sane, and nobody's really excited about the AI Act. So wanted to learn, like, what are the common arguments of your friends who are excited about this? Why are they excited?
Where did you find such people, actually? I mean, I'm a transhumanist movement.
Can you ask me?
It's, for example, so I think what people are especially concerned about is really the existential risk of AI. This is what people are so afraid of. That's why they are, and they're actually people, I mean, I have some people who are actually, I mean, longevity people are, but let's say the mild crowd, but you also have, for example, chronicists, and I would say chronicists often, when I speak to people, chronicists are often, for me, the people who are the most, let's say, open people to technology. Yeah, I mean, they really see technology in a way as a savior for forever. Yeah, and these people are very afraid of general risks due to AI, and I was very surprised that they were so calling for legislation, for regulation.
Okay, I jump in because I wanted to ask more or less the same question. So, do you think that people have an actual, like, because it's still a very general fear, and I'm wondering if it's more like a feeling towards AI that is not very much related to the possible technicalities of it, but more related to, I don't know, this fascination we have around it, and like how much we create a dystopic vision around this technology. Because I'm still struggling to see what's so exceptional about this technology. Okay, we have massive possibilities, but is it scary? Like, we are still the one doing it. So maybe I'm too much of a legal one, but please.
I will be addressing that point in my remarks later this afternoon. But I will say this, there are many people who are worried about existential risks who are not excited about the EU AI Act. They're sort of resigned and say, well, it's not great, but at least it's a step forwards. So I don't know many people who are really enthusiastic through and through about it, but they say at least it's a start and we have to improve it. I'll give you an example. Elon Musk said as far ago as about 2015, normally he doesn't like regulations. Normally he's a go-ahead guy and wants to bust through lots of oppositions and bureaucrats, but he would make an exception for existential risk of AI. And even recently, he was actually a supporter of the California legislation, which in the end was vetoed by the governor of California, Gavin Newsom. But Elon Musk said that was a shame and there should have been some regulation in place there. And what are we worried about? Well, we're worried about all technology is a double-edged sword. And AI is a very general purpose technology. It can be used in all kinds of ways. At the same time, it can be used to develop new drugs that have low toxicity. With the same program, with a slight change, can develop drugs which have got a lethal toxicity. And who's going to be daft enough to generate that? Well, there are some crazy people in the world who want to generate that. So that's an argument for being careful and for trying to have some guardrails. It's not an argument that says that the EU AI Act is the final word on it. It's just a step in the right direction, as was the California Act.
Thank you, David. My view on the AI Act is that, well, AI Act will not reduce the likelihood of a bad event happening with AI. It will reduce the likelihood of that event happening in Europe. So let's just be honest. They're like over-regulating Europe is not going to change anything.
But to be honest, that you can always say. That's like, you know, if you're not doing it, oh, China will be doing it. You know, I've been hearing that forever as an argument to basically forget all the morals and ethics. So yes, I would argue it's still worthwhile that basically do what you can and don't say it will happen anyway. I think it's still a good argument that if we keep on acting.
So before I give the word to Anton, a few comments. What you are asking, Sophia, I understand it, and I think most people understand it until the moment that artificial intelligence could be really better than humans. But it is, I would say, a question almost totally non-related to the discussions here. But it's a big question, and indeed, many of the very techno-progressive people like myself, they think, yeah, this could be really very, very, very dangerous and suppress us. And as a longevist, I'm interested in living longer, so not to be destroyed. But this is really a question outside of the let's say healthcare directly. I would something that I will also say soon. It's I think if you use AI really first for longevity and resilience, the risks are a bit less important. Then to Jan, I will give you one example that I don't like so much, but that's GDPR. GDPR is only European, but de facto it's in the world. Among other things, because Microsoft and the others, they have the choice between to create one environment for everybody, complicated and respecting the rules for everybody in the world, or to create two environments, and that is even more complicated. So that's why in many cases, and even in China, for a big part, they copy-paste the legislation, the laws at the European level. The big part is, of course, except the fact that the PCC, Communist Party, and the